Today's guest is a former CIA spy and expert in psychological warfare.
I would say the most powerful weapon in CIA, it's the perception of connection. When you can find out what relationship is missing from a person's connection web and you can fill that, you gain incredible power.
For years, he operated in the shadows, traveling the world recruiting foreign assets and gathering intelligence that shaped U.S. national security.
I would argue that America is one of the easiest countries to spy on for exactly that reason. Our rights as American citizens make us very vulnerable.
Today, he's revealing his secrets, teaching ordinary people how to think like a spy to succeed in real-life scenarios.
That's a question nobody really ever asks. You see that they have a business. Maybe you see that they're growing a business, but you don't ask yourself why. You have to dig into the why before you can understand the what.
In this episode, we'll dive into his most perception-shifting moments in the CIA, unveil his tactics to uncover priceless information, and explore why he's desperate to leave America by 2027.
2027 is my priority goal. If I can make that happen, then great. What it boils down to is that
Andrew Bustamante. Welcome to the Jack Neel Podcast.
I'm stoked to be here, dude. You have got like a sexy ass voice. Holy shit.
I appreciate it, man.
When you turn that thing on, it's like Barry Manilow, like it's sing song, man.
Thank you, man.
Now that I've met your girlfriend, I understand why she likes you.
It's the only reason, honestly. It actually was a key reason with her.
She's like, just turn off the lights and talk to me. Just here's my good night story. Just read it to me.
Maybe that's why she asked me to do that. It's funny. But yeah, man, a good place to start here, fairly general, but to give people an idea of your worldview and how you perceive things. What did the CIA teach you about humans?
The CIA taught me a lot about humans, right? People, human beings, there's good and there's bad, which is really not a fair statement. There's constructive and destructive elements to people. There's no such thing as good and bad. That's one of the things that the agency taught me. There's no such thing as good or bad, right or wrong, just or unjust. There's just consequences, right? Some consequences are productive, meaning they actually create more. Some consequences are destructive. They take something that exists and they break it into smaller chunks, so they reduce it, right? That's really what it all breaks down to. That's why, Iran feels like we're the bad guys and we feel like Iran are the bad guys. We call Iran terrorists. They call us terrorists. Who's the actual terrorist? What is a terrorist tactic? What is a terrorist tool? It's all up in the air for definition. So one of the big things that the agency focuses on is just trying to understand whether the behaviors of a person are productive and beneficial to you, or whether they are destructive and a hindrance to you, and to look at things through that objective lens rather than a subjective lens.
I guess you personally, do you view most humans you interact with as evil, or do you try to segment it as selfish or self-interested?
I very much focus on self-interest. Does this person benefit me? Does this person drain resources from me? Or is this person net neutral? That's how I look at almost all relationships. It was an important lesson that the agency taught us early on to look at relationships not as obligations, not as commitments, but as transactions. Every relationship at its core is transactional. Even though we don't want to admit it, even though people feel slimy about it, it's the truth. If we will let go of all of our preconceptions, we'll start to realize that relationships are transactional. Nobody enjoys a relationship where the transaction costs them more. Right? Every secret shocking news, every mother out there doesn't like being a mom for like the first 5 years. They don't. Mom, I know it's true, right? All the other moms watching telling that I don't know what I'm talking about. You know it's true too. All the dads watching are nodding their heads right now because they know that shit's true. Because a little baby's just a fucking succubus. It sucks money, it sucks time, it sucks sleep, it sucks milk. It just takes everything. So in that transaction, what's the mom getting out of the deal? She's not getting anything, right? In many cases, the dad's not getting anything either. So those first few years with children are super hard because there's no positive counterpoint to all that resource drain. They get a giggle every now and then, they get a decent night's sleep every now and then, but that's not truly a transaction. The same thing is true in university when you go to school, why you like some friends and don't like other friends, why you like some sisters and not other sisters, why you get along with some cousins and not other cousins. It's because what you value, if it's not returned to you, then you don't actually see a positive transaction in the relationship. So then subconsciously, it starts by you realizing that you don't want to be around that person as much as you want to be around other people. And eventually it moves from the subconscious into the prefrontal cortex. And then you actually start intentionally making decisions to stay away from some people and engage with other people.
You've been Christian for a few years now. Would you say that your relationship with Jesus and your study of the Bible, as well as having children, has impacted these views in any way, or is it just more reaffirmed it?
I would say that my experience with Christianity, I was saved in 2004. So I've been born again for a long time. But since 2004, my journey in my own faith has been an interesting journey. It was a journey that started very kind of black and white because I was a military thinker. And then I went and I took my faith into the agency with me, and I started to see the scripture through a different lens. Because when you get outside of the United States, when you start living and working and traveling and operating in the world, you really start to see how fucking shitty human beings are. And now when I read the Bible, what I read in the Bible is that human beings are shitty. I used to read in the Bible like, oh, there's people, and then there's like special people here and special people there. Now when I read in the Bible, it's like everybody's shitty. There's just a few people who try harder to work against their natural instinct to be dickwads, right? And that's the real journey. The real journey is not to try to redeem ourselves. We can't redeem ourselves. That's why Jesus died on the cross. He's our redemption. We're fucked. We can't do it ourselves, right? The best that we can do is work every day to suck less. That's how I read the Bible now. That's how I see my faith now. And there's a level of that that's liberating, because it's like, oh, I'm always going to suck. It takes off all the pressure of having to overachieve. I'm always going to suck at everything. I'm always going to sin. I'm always going to be selfish. I'm always going to make people feel bad. Like, this is the way it's going to be forever. What I need to do is challenge myself to perpetually try to honor the Father who granted me my propitiation. That's my job, is to try. But the funny thing is, even if I don't try, Jesus Christ is still the Redeemer.
Beautifully said. I want to touch more on your spirituality later in our conversation. But I want to zoom back to, I think it was 2011, you did a Reddit post. It was like, I worked for the CIA, ask me anything. And one of the top threads was something along the lines of not trusting people who didn't speak much. So why don't you trust quiet people?
That's a great call out to that Reddit AMA. That was a transformative moment for me, because that was the first time I had any kind of viral moment. And landing on the front page of Reddit for even just a few hours was kind of like mind-boggling. But in that question, what I was highlighting is that we live in a society where we're kind of taught that we have to speak a lot. We have to gain people's attention. We have to earn validation. We have to earn recognition. We have to earn respect, earn. And the way that you earn those things is by talking. What CIA taught us is that the person who's talking is always divulging information. And they're not only divulging the information that's coming out of their mouth, they're also divulging nonverbal information. What's their face look like as they say the topic they're talking about? What are their hand gestures? How much do they swallow? How much do they spit? How loud are they? How fast do they talk? Do they talk with confidence? Do they talk with some other deliberate effort that you can see? So there's tons of information coming out of the person who's talking, but the person who's quiet reserves all of their information and absorbs all of the speaker's information. So it's not just that the person who's quiet is not disclosing personal details. It's that they're doubling the amount of information they get, because they're protecting their own information and gaining not just one speaker's information, but all the speaker's information. When you naturally are quiet, sometimes socially you feel awkward because there's a social pressure to talk. But at some point, you realize that being a quiet person has its benefits too. The wallflower can sneak in, sneak out. Nobody really worries about them. They can say no to appointments that social people have social pressure to say yes to. Like, you start to learn, introverts learn over time that there's kind of some benefits to being introverted. As much as it isn't socially acceptable sometimes, there are some benefits. The natural introvert isn't my concern. The trained individual who learns to keep their mouth shut, that's the person I don't trust. The person who's got, like you right now, solid eye contact, very active listening, really engaged in terms of nonverbal communication, like that's a skilled person. And that's a person who is picking up everything you're putting down and you're getting nothing from them.
Yeah, I had that experience. The only other CIA affiliated guest we've had on was Chase Hughes.
Good dude. Good dude.
And when I sat down with him, I was just like, it was almost terrifying to speak because how much I saw he was listening and observing everything I was saying. And all the comments are about that. It's like this guy, Jack, is like very intimidated. I'm like, that's exactly what was going through my head. I'm like, you can see everything like through my eyes. But have you improved that skill over the years of sitting and observing with people, or does it kind of like max out at a certain point?
It's always growing, but the growth curve gets smaller.
Yeah.
It also, the nuance and the mastery comes with time, not initially, right? And Chase would say the same thing. When you're first taught how to do this stuff in school, it's very, very technical. It's academic, it's practice-based. It's like learning how to write letters or write numbers, right? It's technique. And then you put a lot of effort into having bad technique. And then you practice and your technique gets better and it gets better and it gets better. But at some point, that return on investment, the growth curve starts to get shallow. You're still improving, but now instead of improving 10% every 2 months, you're improving 1% every 2 months. And then sometimes 1% over the course of a year. I think what's changed for me is that since leaving CIA, I'm no longer dealing with bad guys. Something that people often misunderstand is CIA spends all of their time pairing up its trained officers against the world's worst characters, right? Weapons smugglers, drug runners, nuclear weapons engineers, military generals for foreign hostile countries, like actual villains, if you want to use good and evil, right? Those folks all have been trained, either trained in school or trained through the school of hard knocks. They've all been trained to be suspicious of people like us. That's what the world looks like when you're a CIA operator. When you get out of the CIA and you start to work in everyday life, and now you're doing, working with clients, working with businesses, working with sales teams, working with your own team, those aren't bad people. They're just normal people. And what you find is normal people haven't had the counterintelligence training to be able to work against you. So they're that much more responsive to your techniques. They're that much more communicative with their verbal and nonverbal cues because they've never tried to hold them back, right? And then there's elements inside society that makes people feel emboldened to be themselves and show their attitude. And hey, this is just the way I am. Like, okay, you be you, because that's just more information for me to pick up, right? So what I found is that the mastery continues, but it changes because the target set is completely different. It's almost like spending 2 years operating against the Colombians and then 2 years operating against the French. There's a massive cultural shift between the Colombians and the French. The skills are still the same and they're still people, but the culture, you can literally see the culture when you operate against those two different countries. It's the same thing when you see people who are counterintelligence trained versus people who are not. It's a huge culture change.
It's interesting because Chase, we actually didn't go into too much of his time with the CIA. I think a lot of it is still classified, I would guess. But how would you classify like the different set of skills he might have versus you? I don't know if you've spent a ton of time with him.
Yeah, Chase is a good friend. Okay. And Chase is an absolute professional. So the major difference is understanding that Chase operated in what's known as a controlled environment. He was in an interrogation. In an interrogation, the interrogator controls all elements of the environment. The interrogator controls the temperature of the room, the size of the room, the seat that you're sitting in. They control when you walk out the door. They control when you've eaten, how much you've had to drink. They control when the interrogation starts, when the interrogation ends. So the person who's the target in the interrogation room has no control at all. And as they sit in that chair, they know they have no control. In my world, there is no room. We're not carrying out interrogations. We're carrying out human intelligence operations. So we have to find a target in the native environment, in the open world. They can walk away from us anytime. They can leave anytime. They can lie to us anytime. We have no control that they don't voluntarily give us. So the skills are very different in terms of how they're applied, but conceptually they're very similar. Just as an example, Chase has made, phenomenal references that talk about micro expressions. Micro expressions only work in an interrogation setting, because in an interrogation setting, you have the time, the space, and the command to get a baseline for your target and watch the change in that baseline as the interrogation continues. Consider blink rate. In this setting, with this lighting, where you're sitting and I'm sitting, the angle of the lights, you're going to have a certain blink rate. That's going to be your baseline. As I stress you out during the interrogation, your blink rate will start to change. And that's how I'll see that the stress is kicking in, that the cognitive load is increasing, that you're trying to fabricate. I'm going to see that change in your blink rate. Well, if I fucking take you outside right now into the LA sunshine, guess what's going to increase? Your blink rate. Just because we're outside, there's a breeze and the sun's high in the sky. So it would be false to say that by taking you outside and seeing you increase your blink rate, that must mean that you're stressed. No, I have to take the environment into consideration. So that's just one example of the difference between the interrogation world and the field intelligence collection world.
So essentially you're used to having less control over a lot of the variables. So I guess it'd be good to ask you to get a difference in his perspective on this, but what can you tell about a person just by looking at their face?
In field operations, you can't tell a lot. You can't tell a lot because you've got the environment to consider. You've got the fact that the people that you are meeting, you only get to observe them while they are aware that you are observing them, right? In interrogation rooms, they sit in a chair. You've got cameras. You've got two-way mirrors. You've got somebody who's watching them for hours before the interrogator ever walks in. Out in the field, you might be sitting at a cafe for hours waiting for the target to show up to get their cup of coffee. So you don't actually get to see their face until you're actually engaging them. And then from that moment, you have to understand that you have now interrupted their baseline just by introducing yourself to them, right? Anybody who's ever gone on a first date or anybody who's ever approached a woman or had a woman approach them out when they were single knows exactly what this feels like, right? You are interrupting whatever it is that they were in the middle of. So I have this example that I go through in my training courses where there are men who approach women and they have a perfectly good line, a perfectly good opening line. They are good looking guys. The girl is interested in them. But when she sees them and she's interrupted by them, when they tap her on the shoulder or they say something to her in the middle of the shampoo aisle at the grocery store or whatever, when they say something, her face looks like this. Well, when the guy sees a girl's face look confused, he immediately thinks, it's me. She doesn't like me. They're not thinking, we just interrupted her mental flow. Now imagine that girl is an introvert, or imagine that girl is highly analytical, very, very smart. Sometimes people who have a high intelligence quotient have a low processing speed, right? And that low processing speed allows their prefrontal cortex to absorb more information before it makes a conclusion. So now the smart, pretty girl is going to give you that face for a longer period of time because she's processing what's happening right now. Where the dumb girl, who's really shallow, is going to get past it really fast and be like, oh, hi, right? So it's the inverse of what we're actually looking for. Granted, there are sometimes you want to look for a dumb girl, but generally speaking, the smarter the person, the slower the processing speed, the longer you have to sit in what we call sitting in the discomfort. You have to sit in that discomfort and give their brain a chance to actually work. If it's that hard during dating, imagine how hard it is during treason, right? The same thing happens in business negotiations. You make an offer and then they give you a face and you're like, oh, I just pissed them off. No, you just interrupt. They've had a number in their mind the whole time. You just presented a different number. You got to give time for that cognitive dissonance to work itself out, that grinding of the mental gears.
So you said that people with higher IQs have slower processing speeds.
Oftentimes people with higher cognitive capabilities, not the same thing as IQ, right? Intelligence quotient basically means the level to which you are capable of having complex thoughts. But people who have high cognitive capability, they may not have a very high IQ, but they still have a high level of cognitive capability. They can still learn a lot. They can still measure a lot. So IQ is one quotient, EQ is another quotient, and then you have technical capabilities. I don't know if you've ever met somebody who is borderline mentally not neurotypical. What in the non-politically correct worlds we call a retard. You might meet somebody who's borderline retarded, but amazing at small engines or amazing at computer programming, right? That person has a great deal of cognitive capability, but they may not have a very high IQ.
And they would have a slower processing speed, theoretically.
Theoretically, for things not related to what they're good at.
Because they're hyper-focused on the one thing, so it takes a lot because it's that cognitive dissonance.
And there's also this building process, right? Because your brain connects, your neurotransmitters connect faster on things that they see more frequently. So musicians who have played the guitar for decades can learn a new piece of music faster than guitarists who have not been playing the guitar for decades. That has nothing to do with their IQ or their cognitive capability. It's just a matter of how fast those neural networks have been built, what we call muscle memory.
Something I want to talk about, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was on the farm where there was like an exercise where you had to get a free cup of coffee. So how do spies get a free cup of coffee?
It's such a fun exercise when you first go through it. And you're exactly right. During our, essentially what you could classify as basic training for CIA, everybody goes through the farm, what's known as the Field Tradecraft Course, FTC. And we go through the course, and just like I was explaining in one of your previous questions, it's very academic at first, and then it becomes very experiential by the end, because you have to learn the skills and suck at the skills and practice them and get better at them so that you can try to reach some level of performance before you actually graduate. One of the skills that they want us to learn is how to add instant value. That's the skill, adding the perception of instant value to someone. The way that they exercise that is with this free cup of coffee exercise. So the mission, the challenge, is you have to get a free cup of coffee from an absolute stranger within a certain window of time that they assign you. And there's certain rules. You can't ask for the cup of coffee. You can't trade them a cup of coffee. It can't be any kind of like favor, right? So they have to voluntarily come up with the idea themselves that you incept into their mind to buy you a cup of coffee that is more than $3. It can't be an inexpensive cup. It can't be a 50-cent cup of coffee at like a cafe or in a 7-Eleven, right? So those are the rules. And then you go out and you have to execute. And most of us fail over and over and over again until it clicks that it's not a challenge for coffee. It's not a challenge for schmoozing. It's not a challenge for being a great conversationalist. It's a simple challenge to create the perception of value that exceeds the tangible cost of a $3 cup of coffee. So what can I give my target in terms of social equity, right? Social capital, the term that we use. What can I give them in terms of social capital that exceeds the $3.50 or $7, depending on what city you're in, the value of a cup of coffee they're buying for you, right? Sometimes it's very specific to the target. A little old lady in like rural Alabama, all she might need is for you to sit there and ask her questions about her grandkids and her pets. And she might be like, oh, you're such a sweet boy. Let me get that cup of coffee for you, right? In some places like busy New York, it might be something different. It might be having to have a conversation with somebody that's a deep dive into Andy Warhol paintings, right? But there's always something that people have that they value greatly that they don't get enough of. And if you can give them the thing that they value, they perceive that value as exceptional compared to a $4 cup of coffee.
And have you exercised this in the real world?
Absolutely. I will get a free cup of coffee probably a dozen times a year. I'm not even trying anymore. Now I stand in a line somewhere, or I stand like it happened just a few days ago at the airport. Somebody recognized me from a podcast. I stood there in line. I was polite to them. They asked me a couple of questions about what's this guy like and what's that person like, and do you get tired? And as soon as I got to the checkout lane, they just were like, I'm going to get his coffee. I didn't ask for it, but they perceived enough value from me answering their questions and being polite to them or whatever else that they wanted to buy me a cup of coffee. They wanted to reciprocate that value.
So the free cup of coffee, it's not necessarily from the coffee shop. It's could be from someone else in line.
Correct. Honestly, you're going to have an easier time getting it from somebody else in line than getting it from the coffee shop. But we all make that mistake too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
We also all make the mistake of trying to like cajole someone into it by getting to the cash register and then being like, where's my wallet? I don't have my wallet. And you think someone's going to buy you a cup of coffee, and instead the barista just keeps your coffee on her side. And the person behind you gives you a dirty look. So it doesn't work.
So do you have a framework for the different types of value you can provide in a situation to get the thing that you want?
There is a framework that's related to that, right? And the framework is called RICE. It's a four-part framework that we use to identify the core motivations that inspire a person. We're all motivated, but we're all motivated by different things. And even while we change in our age and we change in our lifestyles, our four core motivations don't change. And our deepest motivator also doesn't change over time, right? So RICE, R-I-C-E, is the acronym we use for these four different motivational levers. R stands for reward, I stands for ideology, C stands for coercion, E stands for ego. Every human being, no matter what language comes out of their mouth or what they carry between their legs, falls under these four motivations. Reward means, what are you going to give me to motivate me to take action? Whether it's money or attention or kisses or a free cruise, right? What am I going to get? There are lots of people who are heavily motivated by what they will get. I is ideology. Ideology is all about what you believe to be subjectively true, false, right, wrong, good, evil, right? This is your high school alma mater. This is your college mascot. This is your faith. This is your hometown heroes, right? Like, all that's ideology. This is your nationalism. Why is it that as soon as the national anthem plays, we all stand up and take off our hats? Fucking ideology, man, right? That's what that is. We're motivated because we are hoorah American. C stands for coercion. Coercion is all the negative stuff. Shame, embarrassment, humiliation. That shit's motivating. Fear, right? When you hold a gun to someone's head, they are motivated. When you threaten to fire someone, they are motivated. But there's an obvious downside to that, because once you use coercion, you don't really get a second chance to coerce them again because they avoid you, right? You don't get to use that a second time. And the fourth one is ego. And ego is the one that's the most complicated, only because people misunderstand ego and egotism. Egotism is when you feel like you are the most important person in the room all the time. Ego is not being egotistical. Ego means how you view yourself and how you want to be viewed. We all have an ego. We all have a way we want to be viewed. We all have a way we want to be perceived, whether that's Mother Teresa or Gandhi or Donald Trump. We all have an ego. If you can align the person's ego with the behaviors that you show towards them, you can literally show them a version of themselves that they want to see, which then delivers value that they want to reciprocate. So with those four different motivators, you can create the perception of value artificially or genuinely for your target.
And which of those would you say is most valuable?
The strongest by far is ideology. When you understand someone's ideology and you echo it back at them, you can move mountains, right? That's how you end up having monks that light themselves on fire during the Vietnam War. That's how you end up having fucking people strap bombs to their chest and then blow themselves up in public squares, or people hijack airplanes and crash it into buildings while they're still in the pilot seat. That's all ideology. That's some powerful shit, man, right? That stuff is so powerful that there are thousands of people every year who vow celibacy and fight the urge that is so natural to have sex their entire life, right? That's how strong ideology is.
When dealing in like high stakes business scenarios and with top level entrepreneurs, would you say that it tends to lean more toward ego, or would you say it's still the ideology portion?
That's a great question. It actually, it's a pretty solid split between ego and ideology in the business world. The hardest thing to do is understand why they're in business. That's a question nobody really ever asks. You see that they have a business. Maybe you see that they're growing a business, but you don't ask yourself, why? Why do they have this business? Why not some other business? Why not some other job? Why are they making $5 million a year, 10 million a year, or 100 million a year? Is it because they wanted to? or because they have to, or because they did it accidentally, or is it because they have some like secondary partner who's feeding them opportunities? You have to dig into the why before you can understand the what in business. So it's very easy. I mean, one of the things that drives me up a wall with American culture is that people like to accuse wealthy, successful business owners of being greedy. That's just a narrative that's been grown over time by more fucking stupid poor people. There's no reason to think that rich people, successful people, are greedy by default. They are not. I've met plenty of wealthy people who could care less about money, but they want to win. And the only way they can measure victory is with a dollar sign. Some people measure victory with people that they hire. Well, in order to hire people, those people make you money and those people cost money. So somebody could be exclusively focused on growing the largest company based off of headcount or based off of customers or based off of market share, but they're going to be accused of being money motivated and being greedy. And that may not be the case at all, right? So you really have to understand why the person's in business. There's a lot of people who are in business because they had to adopt the family business. They don't even like it, but they're doing it because they have to. And the thing is such a well-oiled machine that when dad and granddad gave it down the chain, now that it's with you, you could literally sit on your thumb and the thing's still going to make hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And you're bored and you feel trapped if you feel anything at all, right? If you don't know why they're doing it, then it's going to be very hard for you to gain leverage in the negotiation.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Do you have any advice for people dealing with maybe working for, doing business with figures like Kanye, Trump, like these notorious high egos that are a bit tough to handle like conversations or communication with?
It goes back to what we were talking earlier about consequences, right? Productive outcomes and destructive outcomes. Let's take the Elon Musk, Donald Trump disaster that's happening right now. These two were buddy-buddy during the election cycle, right? And then during the first 100 days, you couldn't separate the two of them, right? Like they were licking off the same ice cream cone. Now they're throwing like missiles at each other on Twitter. And everybody's talking about Trump hates Elon, Elon hates Trump. The miscalculation here, to me, is fairly clear. Elon, who is clearly on the autistic spectrum, who leans heavily in the Asperger's direction, high IQ, high cognitive capability, low emotional intelligence quotient or emotional quotient, right? Elon was thinking, if I help Trump, Trump will help me. Like, that's a logical 1-0-0-1-0 kind of decision, right? Trump was thinking, I'm the fucking president. And once I'm the president, I don't have to help anybody I don't want to help, but everybody wants to help me, right? So for him, the scale didn't tip. Elon helped him, and Trump was like, of course he helps me. I'm the president. If you've seen the musical Hamilton, it's such a good musical for so many different reasons, but there's this incredible point where Thomas Jefferson in the musical decides to change the rules about who becomes vice president. Prior to Thomas Jefferson becoming president, the vice president was always the runner-up in the election, right? So here, in this case, the runner-up went to Thomas Jefferson and was like, hey, I'm excited to be your vice president. And Jefferson looked at me and was like, you're not going to be my vice president. I'm changing that rule. How? Because I'm the president, right? There's leverage there. Trump knew he had leverage. Elon thought he was winning leverage from Trump, and he wasn't. So you have to understand who you're dealing with. I say that because your original question was, how do you deal with these people who have large egos? First, I wouldn't assume that it's ego that they have. It could be something else. Could be ideology. Trump could have a winning ideology or a authoritative ideology, or he's kind of a tough nut to crack because we only see what we see on TV, right? It's not like we get to have drinks with him in Mar-a-Lago very often. But when you understand why they are the way they are, then you can understand what they're actually, what's driving them. So if you think that you've got someone who's being driven by ego, then you have to ask yourself, what leverage do I actually have? And if you don't have leverage, how productive is the consequence going to be? Or how destructive could the consequence be? And then is that how you want to spend your resources?
Yeah, it's a fascinating one because from what I've noticed, there are two types of entrepreneurs like you're describing, the ones that are all about value exchange and equal value and like they feel bad if it's not fair. Then the other ones are like, you work for me, you're part of my team, you're part of my vision. And the only way I've found to go around those people is just lean into it. But I guess, how do you extract the value from situations like that?
I actually really like working with the person who, you're on my team, you're part of my vision, because they're completely sold out to their vision. So all you have to do is show them how working with you aligns with their vision. Even better, how working with you gets them to their vision faster and cheaper than working with somebody else, right? And if you don't want to compete on price, then don't make it cheaper, just faster and with higher confidence, right? That's, if you can make someone believe that your product gets them to their endpoint faster and more successfully, then you have a premium product. I will also say entrepreneurs are very similar to like CIA case officers. Case officers are your field intelligence officers that you see in the movies. Those are almost always case officers. Very, very similar mindset, risk tolerance, relational dynamics between a case officer and an entrepreneur. They want to take risks. They don't like the routine of doing the same thing a million times. They like having big vision. They like thinking 10 years down the road, not 10 days down the road, and for sure not 10 minutes down the road, right? And they for damn sure don't like thinking 10 minutes in the past. So there's all these things that are very similar between case officers and entrepreneurs, which is another reason why I like working with entrepreneurs. I like being around entrepreneurs because it feels very much like being in CIA. So if you are part of an entrepreneur mastermind, you're actually much closer to what it's like to sit in a CIA bullpen with a handful of other CIA officers who are working different cases. Everybody has a different personality, but by and large, they're all trying to achieve something where the probabilities of success are against them and their vision is what drives them.
What are some skills then that you see CIA field officers use that entrepreneurs often neglect or lack?
So there's a few of them. One of the biggest is the whole idea of keeping your mouth shut, of listening instead of talking, right? Entrepreneurs like to talk. They feel like they have to pitch all the time. They have to pitch, they have to defend, they have to justify, right? Every minute they're not talking is a minute they're not making money. You can make huge evolutions if you don't talk. If you listen to your client, listen to the market, listen to your peers, listen to your customers, listen to your employees. If you listen to them and you give your brain the space to find trends, find emerging threats, find patterns, which an entrepreneur's mind is good at, if you do that, then you'll be able to make fewer changes that have a higher impact. Where if you're constantly just pushing and pushing and pushing, you're going to roll right over those. You're going to grow one step at a time instead of ever taking a giant leap, right? Another thing that entrepreneurs do a bad job of is asking questions. When they talk, they're making statements instead of using those rare moments that they speak to ask questions to get more pointed information, right? The person who's in control of any conversation isn't the person who speaks the most. It's the person who asks the questions. Because the person who asks the questions is like the interrogator. They decide what the next topic of conversation is. They decide how long you're allowed to speak. They decide when and if they're going to share any information in the conversation, other than asking the question itself, right? So you take control of a conversation when you ask questions. So if entrepreneurs asked more questions, they would collect more intelligence, and they need that intelligence to make informed decisions to achieve their vision. The information is often out there, but people just aren't sharing it with you. Every entrepreneur has had that experience where they've been with a client or they've been with a fucking employee, and there's some piece of information that the entrepreneur is desperate to get, but they just assume nobody has the information because nobody has shared it with them. They've shouted it from the rooftops. Hey, if anybody has an idea for how to reduce costs in XYZ, just tell me. And nobody tells them, right? Because some people literally need to be asked a question. They have the answer, but they need to hear you say to them, do you have any ideas on how I can do this thing? And until you ask them directly, they will not volunteer it because they're wired to keep their ideas themselves because maybe they're afraid that their idea is a bad idea and they're afraid of embarrassing themselves. And they would rather sit there and have an idea that's a good idea that's theirs rather than risk it being a bad idea when they say it out loud.
On the RICE acronym, you mentioned coercion. Do you usually try to avoid business with anyone who tries to use coercion tactics? And how can you tell if someone is trying to manipulate you?
It's a great question. And this is something that I think a lot of us have had experience with being manipulated. If not in business and if not in professional life, then for sure in our personal life. Parents, friends, ex-boyfriends, ex-girlfriends, who knows what, current wives, right? Future husbands, who knows? But I'm going to break your question into two, right? Do you do business with people who coerce you? That's question one. And then how do you know if someone's trying to manipulate you? That's question number two. I avoid business where I see coercive behavior because when someone is trying to coerce you, oftentimes what that means is that they are immature in some other element of social interaction. So that means that if they're going to coerce you once, they will coerce you again. And it's very likely that their other business relationships are also coercive and their leadership style is also coercive. So now you've got what we call in the agency a house of cards. It's a big, beautiful house, but if any one thing falls apart, the whole thing is going to come crumbling down because this person has built a universe that's all shame, guilt, and fear-based. Shame, guilt, and fear are all negative feelings that are very resource draining. So all the individuals that are currently being controlled through those tools, once they're given an opportunity, once they're given an alternative to not have to feel that anymore, they're going to punch. Whether that's an investor or whether that's a vice president or whether that's a low-level customer service rep. And once that one person punches, then work is going to fall onto other people who aren't going to be motivated to do a good job because they're just trying to survive, and then they're going to punch, and then the whole thing falls apart, right? So I stay away from people who I see exercising coercive activities, coercive practices, not necessarily because I feel like it's unfair to me, but because it's a level of immaturity that shows me that they're desperate. If they can't find a way to use the other three productive motivators, they can't find a way to motivate with reward ideology or ego, the only thing they can use right now is guilt, shame, fear, embarrassment. It's not worth it. It's the risk exposure to me and my objectives are too great. How do you know if someone's manipulating you? The short answer is when someone is trying to manipulate you, the biggest indicator is usually how you feel. You have very strong feelings when someone is trying to manipulate because manipulation is emotionally based in nature. They have to pull on emotions, whether those are coercive emotions or positive emotions. Oh, you're so beautiful. Your hair is so nice. You're so smart. Those are all things that make you feel good, but they're very indicative of you're getting ready to be manipulated, like mutated, moved in a certain direction because they're priming you for emotional compliance, right? Whereas when somebody comes to you and they don't use emotional words, right? They use logic-based words. It's wise. It's in your best interest. You should consider those things are much less powerful to you because they're not emotional, right? So as soon as you start to feel anything in a conversation, that should be your first trigger to say, am I being manipulated? It doesn't mean you are because manipulation is based on intent, right? They may not be intending to manipulate you, but your indicator is still the same.
So that's how you know if someone's manipulating you. How can you tell if you're being spied on?
So there's a lot of elements that go into the term being spied on, right? There's being physically observed, which is when you have someone who's got eyes on you, essentially when you are a target or when you are a rabbit, that's physical surveillance or physical observation. There's also digital observation. Digital observation can be split between imagery collection and data collection. So now whether there's a drone on you or a camera on you, that's all digital collection, but it's imagery. Whereas if someone's tracking your cell phone or if someone's monitoring your web traffic, that's digital, like cookie traffic, right? That's a different types of observation. Then you also have kind of like secondary or second ring observation, which is when they're spying on you by talking to the people who are around you. They're not directly collecting from you. They're collecting indirectly from the people around you. So they might be following your mom or your dad or listening to the family phone calls or listening to your wife's phone calls to try to track what you're doing. That's all a secondary type of collection.
Is that one more common?
Oftentimes, secondary collection is the way that we start. because to collect on an individual, you run the risk of them discovering that they're being collected upon. And once they've been cued in, or once they've been clued in that they're being collected upon, they can change their behavior and then you lose everything. Whereas if you follow the spouse, you get everything you need to about the person, but the spouse isn't ever what we call CI savvy, counterintelligence savvy. So they're not thinking about how to protect themselves, and they're for sure not thinking about protecting you by protecting their, Facebook account or whatever else it might be. So it's the short answer is very difficult to know if you're being spied on. And I would also say if you become the target of intelligence collection, you can't really get away from it because they have all the benefits. They have the benefit of time, the benefit of space, the benefit of cost, the benefit of technology, and all you have is your own resources. So if you think that you're being spied on and it's true, it's game over. They're going to collect. You can take certain steps to reduce what they collect, but they will adapt and they will collect a new way.
How many people would you say are being spied on right now?
It's a great question. Do you want to talk worldwide or in the United States?
I guess US, yeah.
I would say in the United States, there are probably, I would guess somewhere between 250 to 500,000 targets of active intelligence collection inside the United States.
And is that one officer assigned to them or a group?
No. I'm talking about all collection from all countries and all adversaries, right? I'm not even talking about Americans collecting on Americans. Like I'm not talking about FBI following a drug dealer, right? That's also a type of spying, right? I'm just talking about foreign nations targeting American citizens for some sort of intelligence purpose. I would guess it's between 250,000 and 500,000 people, because oftentimes one officer will cover multiple targets. So if you think about it, let's just say we know that we can estimate there's about 10,000 undercover American CIA officers around the world, right? So that's our unclassified demarcation line. Each of those 10,000 officers can easily cover and spy on 25 to 40 people a year, right? So each of those 10 to 25 or 45 people, now you got 45,000. Is that right? 410? Somebody help me with public math.
10,050 people, 500K?
500,000, right? So over the course of a year, just 10,000 officers can cover that, right? And that's over the course of a year. At any given moment, if you have all the officers around the world, and we have a very large intelligence service, it's not like the Panamanians don't have 10,000 undercover officers. They might have 70, but they're going to be operating here in the US. They're going to be operating all over the world.
And then CIA, is the only country we don't operate in North Korea?
I'm going to reframe your question. What you're asking is, are there countries around the world where CIA doesn't have access? Well, we call those denied areas. Denied areas is the term that we use for any country where policy or border security or some other element keeps Americans out. Now, CIA, of course, has ways to make officers go in who do not appear to be American, right? There are some countries where a Brit can go or a Canadian can go that an American can't go. So all you need to do is have a UK passport or a Canadian passport and you can get in. Sometimes you do that with a false flag operation where you pretend to be someone else, but you don't have their permission. Sometimes you do it with a joint operation where you actually work with the Canadian Secret Intelligence Service, CSIS, to get a Canadian passport for an American citizen. There's all sorts of ways that you can kind of slice the cat or skin the cat. But there are, in general, I think we have 3 denied areas right now. North Korea is a denied area. Belarus is a denied area. And I'm pretty sure Iran is a denied area. So those are 3 denied areas where you cannot get in as an American by policy, security, or some other purpose. You can still get into China. You can still get into Russia.
Is that just because of tourism? Like they just want to keep the money for tourism there?
Oftentimes denied areas make their immigration policies very hostile because they know that if someone gets in, it's going to be very hard for them to track that person. So it's just safer to keep them out. The tourist dollars aren't worth the intelligence risk, if you put it a different way, right?
But that is the case for China and Russia.
Right.
The
China and
stars are
Russia,
worth it.
like they know they have the capabilities inside their country that if an American spy goes into China, China's got more resources. If an American spy goes into Russia, Russia's got more resources. An American spy goes into North Korea may not have the resources to actually track that person down.
This is a bit off topic, but why can't Putin launch a nuclear bomb?
There's a number of reasons why Putin can't launch a nuclear weapon. Why? And let me clarify that. He always has the ability to just call a command and launch a missile, right? But the disaster, the blowback would be too significant geopolitically. There's many other ways that he can deploy a nuclear weapon to get the same effect without having to risk the geopolitical blowback. So the short answer, why can't he launch a missile, is because if he were to launch a missile, the blowback against him from his allies, from people who are collaborating with him, et cetera, would be too great. He would lose much of the position and momentum that he currently has, right? And being the country that triggers a nuclear weapon, you run the risk of other people triggering nuclear weapons, and you don't know if they're going to do the right thing or the wrong thing with their nuclear weapons. So Russia's still at risk of a nuclear disaster if they launch and, say, France launches on them, right? Or the US and France launch on them. And Israel sends something that we don't even know they have. There's all sorts of reasons why they wouldn't want to do it. But the primary reason is because if Putin wants to deploy a nuclear weapon in Kiev, he's got at least 3 other vectors where he can do it and have plausible deniability that it ever came from Russia, right? He can have some Iranian proxy group go into Kiev with a suitcase nuke and blow it up there. He can have some Hamas or Iraqi rebel group that they can launch from some controlled zone that they have, and it doesn't even come from Russia, and it can be on a little hypersonic missile that they have. He can have something smuggled through Belarus and then brought just down south a little bit, and it's already in Kiev. And it could be triggered by Belarus instead of by Russia. And then what's the world going to say, right? The trick with nuclear war, we learned it immediately after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. When you use a nuclear weapon, you have to have a reason in the deployment that causes a moment of pause for your enemies. There has to be a reason that they wait. Because if they wait, then tempers will cool and alternate responses will be discovered. If you don't give them a chance to cool, if you don't give cooler heads a chance to prevail, then the list of responses is much shorter. And at the top of the response list is, well, let's just throw a nuke at them. So what Putin knows, and what all of us know now, all of the nuclear capable countries, is that if you're going to deploy a nuke, you have to deploy it in what's called the fog of war. You have to deploy it in a way that's confusing, because when you launch that capability and it's confusing, everybody's confused first. So then they just start thinking about alternatives and trying to understand what's happening. And by the time anybody gets to a response, it's significantly reduced, right? It's a built-in de-escalation technique.
But in the time of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, did other countries have nuclear capabilities, or was it just the U.S.?
It was a race, right?
Okay, so that was the reason for the pause there. So
Correct.
Do you see any possibility that a nuclear weapon is launched in our lifetime?
Now that so again, I'm going to be specific because you're asking about launching, right? Launching. When you launch a nuclear weapon, whether it's from a submarine, whether you launch it from a cruise missile, whether you launch it from a land-based silo or a mobile silo, we live in a world now where anything that's launched is going to have early warning detection. And that early warning detection is going to essentially negate the value of the launch. So you lose the element of surprise, depending on the technology that people have claimed to have or may not have, or technology that could work or couldn't work, like Golden Dome or laser intercepts. There's no guarantee that the missile you launch is even going to actually deliver. It could be intercepted and destroyed, right? So I think we are finding ourselves in a time when launching a nuclear missile is very, very improbable. It could happen. Desperate things could happen. You could have a volley of nuclear missiles like you see when Iran or Hezbollah does a missile attack against Israel. They just launch a volley because they're trying to overwhelm the missile defense systems. So you could see a volley from someplace like North Korea. You could see a volley from someplace like Russia, right? Or Iran. So all of that to say, I think a launch is something that we'll probably never see. I think a launch is something that we'll never have to worry about ever. But a smuggled in nuke or a dirty nuke, a suitcase nuke, a truck-based nuke, a boat-based nuke, those are what cause me bigger concerns. I mean, we've got nuclear technology, warheads that are highly tactical, that fit on the end of a Stinger missile. I mean, that's the kind of thing where, I mean, it's not too much of an overstatement to say you could unscrew it off the Stinger missile, drop it in your backpack, and ride your bike to wherever you want to detonate the thing. Do you know what I mean? It's technically more complicated than that, but I mean, you're literally talking about a warhead that's the size of a football.
I was not aware of that. There's like 2,000 nuclear bombs, right? Or is it much higher?
So it's much higher. There's approximately 2,000 ballistic warheads on ICBMs. And ICBMs are intercontinental ballistic missiles. So those are the missiles that launch from the ground, go up into space, and then deploy. You've got cruise missiles on bombers. You've got missiles that sit on subs. And every missile has multiple warheads, multiple independently targetable warheads.
If you had to rank them in order of like powerful intelligence agencies per country, like who has the most powerful intelligence agency in the world?
When you think about intelligence and intelligence capability, you have to think about how they use that capability. It's not just about apples to apples, right? It's like apples to bananas to oranges to strawberries. So the United States has the best funded and the most capable broad spectrum intelligence skill set, right? We have paramilitary, we have physical assets like drones and airplanes. We have field-based intelligence officers that are in a constant pipeline, so they're always being deployed. We have incredible capabilities for offensive and defensive cyber communication. So broad spectrum, highly funded, very capable. So I would call the United States, I would say CIA is the most powerful intelligence agency holistically that's out there. But when you compare CIA against, say, Mossad is much smaller, has less funding, has less broad spectrum capability, but the capabilities that they have are far more lethal, and they have much less hesitance in using those capabilities. It takes a lot of work for CIA to decide to send in a tactical team to kill somebody. I mean, that's a shit ton of paperwork, approval process, delay, planning, it's a lift. That's the kind of thing that Mossad could turn around in 14 days or less. And they have a tolerance to do it, and they're willing to do it, and they see the necessity to do it. So in that way, Mossad is more dangerous, but not as powerful. They're more powerful in one narrow way, right? Consider China's military or Ministry of State Security, their MSS. China has a gigantic population. I think it's 1.4 billion people. And ideologically, Chinese believe that they're Chinese first, right? Even if you are a Chinese immigrant, you are still Chinese first. You're not an American Chinese. You're a Chinese American, right? You're not a British Chinese. You're a Chinese Brit. You're always Chinese first. That's just part of how they're raised. That makes for a massive informal intelligence network. Everywhere there's Chinese diaspora, there's the potential to collect intelligence for the motherland, right? It doesn't mean every Chinese person's a spy, but it definitely means every Chinese person has to ask themselves the question of, would I give information to the federal government of China, right? Would I give it to the Politburo or would I not? Here in the fucking United States, FBI comes and knocks on your door and is like, hey, I need intel on your neighbor. You'd be like, no. Like we feel no conviction to help our government. But it's not like that in China. Like people who are native Chinese born, they always have that compulsive desire or need for one way or for one reason or the other. Maybe it's because they want to help. Maybe it's because they're afraid not to help. Who knows? But they will give information. So that informal network means their reach is unbelievable, right? Every Chinese shop everywhere in the world could potentially send $5 to the mainland and like completely transform their budget, right? So it's a very different way of doing things. Intelligence service that very few people ever talk about is the ISI, which is the Pakistani intelligence service. Pakistan's intelligence service actively deploys terrorist techniques, actual suicide bombers, politically motivated acts of public violence, like as a professional intelligence service, they will use terrorist tactics. That's something that we don't use. That's something that the Chinese don't use. That's something that the Russians don't use. Like, that's some scary shit. But they will use it, and that makes them very powerful in that way. Now, the reason nobody talks about it is because Pakistani ISI is almost completely and totally focused on India. And India's research and analysis wing, RAW, is almost exclusively focused on Pakistan. So you've got these two foes who have high levels of capability and high levels of power that are only focused on basically killing each other.
So India has a fairly capable CIA equivalent intelligence service
that nobody talks about. Yep, the research and analysis wing, RAW.
Are they fairly country first, similar to China?
It's a good question. I would say that the nationalistic element in India is different. They're not necessarily focused on being India first. Oftentimes they're focused on their caste first, or they're focused on their family first, but they are very compelled by ideology, but their ideology isn't country. Even in China, your average Chinese isn't like gung-ho, hoorah, China, Xi Jinping, Politburo, right? They're gung-ho, we're 5,000 years old. They're gung-ho, we've been here longer than anybody else. They're gung-ho, like, we're gonna do things slowly and methodically because that's how we do it, right? In the United States, we're very gung-ho, like red, white, and blue, baseball, apple pie, and guns. Like, that's how we are, but that's not how many countries are.
Is it hard to recruit agents for the CIA that are, let's say, Chinese American or Indian American? Like, are there any ethnicities that are typically harder to get?
That's another great question. What you're getting at here is something that we call hard targets. Like, that's the intelligence term for them, hard targets. Hard targets are the targets that take the longest time to develop into intelligence yielding sources, meaning they are the most resistant to American MO for intelligence collection. Russians are hard targets. Chinese are hard targets. Iranians are hard targets. Belarusians are hard targets. North Koreans are, of course, hard targets. We also have targets that are not classified as hard, but are notoriously difficult to crack, right? Japanese, South Koreans. There's others like that, but culture plays a big role in how susceptible somebody is, because some cultures are very motivated to, most countries around the world are very motivated to work with Americans. Only a few are not motivated. And then even a fewer still are outright disincentivized to work with us.
Right. I guess I was asking, like, do we have a lot of CIA agents that are Chinese? Or is that hard to procure for some reason?
It's a good question. I don't know what the breakdown is of mixed or dual doc citizens or mixed ethnicity American CIA. I will say that CIA, when I was there, was not very diverse. By most of my understanding now, it is still not very diverse, because it's a very difficult due diligence process to get in. So in that due diligence process, if you have any kind of questionable background or questionable connection, you'll be ruled out before you can ever get in. Plus, dating as far back as 2001, 1999, 2001, foreign countries were actively trying to plant ethnically blended people into CIA. So there's cases of Chinese Americans trying to infiltrate CIA, and Russian Americans trying to infiltrate CIA, and Argentine Americans trying to infiltrate CIA. So CIA is very much aware that our diversity is part of the threat profile that our adversaries are trying to use against us. So they do exist. There are a number of contractors and staff officers who are of mixed ethnicity. There's even many of them who are full-on naturalized American citizens, not even blended, right? Born in a foreign country, now made now nationalized to be an American, and now hired by CIA. So that exists as well.
It seems as though the U.S. would be particularly easy to spy on because of the mixed diversity of our citizens.
And I would argue that America is one of the easiest countries to spy on for exactly that reason. Our rights as American citizens make us very vulnerable to foreign spying, because we will let other people become American citizens. We'll let them become naturalized. We'll let them have green cards. We'll let them get work visas. And we are a very, what's known as a permissive environment. We're a very permissive environment for foreign operators to operate here. And other countries aren't the same way.
Why would you guess that we've set the system up that way?
We didn't set the system up thinking about foreign intelligence. We set the system up thinking about American rights and American opportunity and truth, liberty, and the right to happiness, right? Like, we're based on the principles of our forefathers. Let's also not forget, we're fucking young. Like, the United States is a baby. I often joke that we're going through our adolescence. So if you think of us in terms of the average lifespan of a person, we're like early adolescents, right? We're in that 12 to 13 year range where you start getting boners in math class and you don't know what to do with it, and your face breaks out with zits, and you want to talk to girls, but you can't talk to girls, and you suck at football. That's where we are. And China is 5,000 years old, right? Now, granted, their communist system is relatively new, but their cultural identity is ancient. So that's a huge player when it comes to what we will and will not accept inside the borders of our own nation, right? And look at us right now. We have this incredible political divide that still just leaves more distraction than unification, and all of our adversaries take advantage of that. Then you've got this weird, I'm sorry to just keep going on. You've also got this layer of like weird Christian conviction, guilt, Catholic thing going on in the United States too. So if you go to France, you'll see topless people and half naked or fully naked advertising, right? In the United States, we still can't have naked women on TV or have naked women or naked men on advertisements. There are very few nude beaches in the United States. So then that cultural layer of like sexual repression also becomes a major issue for us. And I know lots of people are like, I've had people argue with me like, no, we have Pornhub now. Like, what do you mean we're sexually repressed? Like, we have sex stores and we can get anything we want to on. Yes, we have porn. But would you watch porn with your brother or your sister? Would you put it on when your buddy comes over for like a drink? No. In Europe, that's exactly what they do, right? In places that are truly sexually liberated, like, it's not awkward. It's not awkward to see two people fucking in the corner when you're walking down the street in Brazil. But you're not going to see that in New York. And if you do, they're going to go to jail, right? So it's just, we have all these different cultural identity issues as a country because we're so young that we haven't figured out that just get exploited by these other countries where prostitution has been around forever. And they're like, sex is sex. People are people. It's just the way it works.
On the topic of sex.
That's the best transition ever right there.
What's the most powerful weapon in the CIA?
Ooh. It's not sex. I will say that. I would say the most powerful weapon in CIA is it's either the perception of connection, like genuine connection, or it's attention. It's somewhere in between those two, this perception of connection or attention. Because what you find is that the thing that is the most motivating to people is human connection. It's one of the fundamental psychological requirements that all people have. We must connect with other people. Like, we are a tribal species. We are a community-based animal. Now, there's a bell curve. So there are some people on the far end of the bell curve who don't need much connection, but there are no truly lone wolves. There are no people who really do just want to be alone. Maybe they want to commune with other animals, right? Like the people who go out in the woods and live with bears or wolves, but they still want to connect with something. And then you've got people on the other extreme who like need to always be touching you or holding your hand, right? But the fat part of the bell curve, we all need human connection. We need multiple, productive, meaningful relationships. Child to parent, child to peer, child to child, child to mentee, whatever it is. So we've got all these different relationships that we need. When you can use that, when you can find out what relationship is missing from a person's connection web, and you can fill that, you gain incredible power. And that's not short-term power. That is long-term power, right? How old are you?
23.
23. God, you're a child. It's crazy. So,
how old are you, by the way?
45.
You look young, man.
I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you. So consider this. You're 23, I'm 45. I can guarantee you we both have a teacher from high school that's coming to mind right now. Right? That's everybody. Everybody who's been to a public school or a private school, everybody who wasn't homeschooled, has a teacher that comes to mind as we have this conversation. That person filled a connection in our connection web. And we didn't realize it at the time, but it makes them so noteworthy that we remember them today. If that teacher in your mind were to show up right now, you would be excited. You would have some sort of emotional response. If it's a negative experience, then you would have a negative response. If it's a positive experience, you have a positive response. But so powerful is their role in that connection web that for me, I haven't been in high school for 30 something years, right? And I would still be like, oh, Mr. Boyslary, it's great to see you again. Do you want a whiskey? Like I would try to make him feel good.
You've talked a lot about sex and the whole thing of sexpionage. I feel like people commonly ask you about it, but is sex more effective than violence to get information?
So I love this question about sex and sexpionage, right? So we've got to break it down, because here's what happens. Remember earlier we were talking about the fucking repressed sexual behavior in the United States? That's what's boiling up whenever the sexpionage question comes up. Sex is still a faux pas, right? Vaginas and penises are still things we can't really talk about, right? Like, well, it's not really, we can't talk about desire. It's not fair. It's immature, or it's juvenile, or it's something. It's not professional, right? What is sex? What is sex? Sex is the manifestation of human connection, right? It's literal connection, right? Sex organ to sex organ connection, whether you're homosexual or heterosexual, that is sex. But it is also a connection of attention. In that moment, you're paying attention to one person because you're at least making sure those organs touch, right? So there's this level of intense attention that's happening in that moment. There's often a level of connection that's happening in that moment, even if it's just a carnal connection. You know, I want my sensations to feel good. You want your sensations to feel good. So we are actively connecting to feel good. Even if, one person is a million miles away mentally and somebody else is feeling threatened, like there's still a physical and emotional connection of some sort. So all sex is a shortcut to human connection, because genuine human connection is hard. True vulnerability is way harder than just taking off your clothes, right? True engagement is so much harder than just hands and mouths and genitals on other people's hands and mouths and genitals, right? That shit's easy. Sex is the shortcut to human connection. But what we all desire is human connection. And anybody who's, especially people who are happily married, they will tell you that the longer you're married, the less sex you get. And it's not just because people, get out of shape and bodies change. It's also because you find other ways of having human connection, right? It's massively disappointing. So I'll tell you this at 23 right now, massively disappointing, because however much sex you're having now, you're going to have a hell of a lot less when you're my age, right? You might still want it, but the problem is that if you've been a loving, caring partner, the other person won't need it. The other person is going to feel lots of ways that they're having true, vulnerable, connective experiences with you that don't require any physical activity at all. And if you're the opposite partner, like maybe you'll be married to a female who's very active, or maybe you'll be married to a boy who's very active, for all I know. But if you're less interested than they are, it's because you're being fed all the connective responses that you need, right? But sex is just a physical activity that stands in for an emotional desire.
So it's really not that effective of a tool to get information.
Correct. It's not in the field. We don't use sexpionage, and Americans especially don't use it because you can't force a U.S. citizen to donate their body to science, right? You can't force a female officer to have sex with a target. You can't force a male officer to have sex with a target. You can't assign them. There's no order that you can give them that will make a homosexual act heterosexual or a heterosexual act homosexual, right? You can't do it. China and Russia don't have those individual protections. So they can, and they do use those sexual exploitation operations. What we call sexpionage is officially called sexual exploitation. So some countries do use those techniques, but Americans don't. And the reason we don't is because partially we can't by law, and partially we fucking learned that you have huge blowback implications when you try to professionalize that relationship. A professional intelligence source can be given to another officer. You meet somebody, you develop them, you recruit them, they tell you secrets. Maybe 5 years later, you've got to go do some other sexy job. So you need them to tell their secrets to me. So now you have to bring me into the meeting and be like, hey, this is my buddy Andy. You can trust Andy like you trust me. Tell him anything you need to tell him. High five, fist bump. You've been awesome and I'll see you in 2 years kind of thing, right? You can't do that with a sexual partner, right? You can't just be like, hey, this is my buddy Andy. Like, he's going to bang you from now on. He's the one who's going to do this. He's going to fist bump, high five, and I'll see you in a couple of years. That's not how it works, right? So when Russia and China have those sexual exploitation operations, when Israel does a sexual exploitation operation, it's either for a fixed period of short time or they're in it for the long haul, man.
Males and females, are there any correlations with men being more giving with information to women, being more giving with information to men, older men, younger men? Like, is there any correlation there? Or is it so dependent?
So there's definitely gender and cultural elements that play into the accuracy of stereotypes. We're in America. Americans are watching. Americans think that our country is like biased and gender biased and racist and all sorts of, you could just name the ist and people think that we are that. We're not compared to the rest of the fucking world, right? So we try not to stereotype in the United States, right? Like, oh, if you stereotype, then you're conservative. But we educated liberals know that men and women are really equal. Like, no, like there are true gender and cultural stereotypes everywhere you go. Whether you're in a city in Alabama, the cultural and educational stereotypes can be completely different from city to city. And it's especially true when you cross an ocean, right? We would believe as Americans that men would be more willing to give information to women because we're thinking women can seduce and women are sexy and women have their ways. That's all stereotypes. That's stereotyping men and stereotyping women through the cultural lens of the United States. If you put a woman against an Iraqi, that dude's not telling her shit. You put a woman against a Saudi, he's not telling her dick, right? You put a woman in Russia, he's going to slap her and not talk to her at all. Like that's just the stereotype that's predominant in relationships between women and men. If you've ever walked through the streets of Europe, you've probably seen beautiful 24-year-old women dating fugly 52-year-old men. You've seen it, right? They get married, they have kids. Like that's culturally acceptable there, right? You go to Romania, that's everywhere in Romania. You don't find that here. Here you look for equals that are with equals, right? Intellectual equals, age equals, wealth equals, right? You kind of want to, maybe there's 5 or 7 years of age difference, but it's rare to find 13 or 15 years of age difference, let alone 20 or 25 years of age difference. So the stereotypes all fall apart. That said, we will leverage the stereotypes in our targeting efforts. So you can't send a woman to collect information against an Iraqi guy. You also can't send a guy to collect information against an Iraqi woman. But you can send a woman from America to Iraq to collect against an Iraqi female target. You'll have better success there, right? And that's how we use it. We use it to our advantage in that way. That's also how our adversaries collect against us. They use the same stereotypes against us, but that's where the gender piece really plays in.
This is just out of my own curiosity. How do you know if someone in your family is like CIA or FBI? Because I've met a lot of people like who are like, oh yeah, I don't know what my dad does. And then they like start saying things. They're like, oh, he's always traveling, or like, it just seems fishy. But how do you have like suspicions of that?
So it's a funny question because there are essentially 3 types of CIA officers. There's what's called an overt officer, a covert officer, and then a seconded officer. An overt officer is somebody who works for CIA. They get paid by CIA. They drive their car to CIA. They have a little badge around their neck that says CIA. Like, they are a CIA officer. And they're overt because there's no cover that they're under, right? The IRS sends them a paycheck from, like, it says CIA right there on their W-2. And like, it's very clear when they apply for a mortgage, My employer is CIA. That's the vast majority of CIA officers are overt. All of your analysts, your logisticians, your alias docs people, the people who make disguises, the people who make technical devices. There's all the security personnel, like all the carpool and motor pool people, like all the pilots, they're all overt CIA, right? And they're called overt. Then you've got the covert officers, and your covert officers are the officers who live under a cover identity. They're not affiliated with CIA. They do something else or work for someone else, right? Whatever that cover legend might be, it's truly backstopped. Backstop meaning effort has been put into deriving their true identity. So if you're overt and I call your work phone, it goes to CIA. If you're overt. If you're covert, I call your work phone and a CIA operator picks it up, but they say whatever your cover business is or whatever your cover work is, right? So there's backstopping there. And then you have seconded officers. Seconded officers are officers who have a special skill that works somewhere else in the military or the government. Maybe they're a translator, maybe they're a military person, maybe they're a Navy SEAL, but CIA has an operation for them. So they basically reach out and tap them and pull them in and grant them CIA authorities for the time period that they're assigned to CIA. So your family member could be any one of those three and still technically be a CIA officer, overt, covert, or seconded. It's very hard to say what looks suspicious or what doesn't look suspicious, right? I've had covert officers whose families had no idea they were affiliated with CIA. I've had overt officers who lied to their families because they felt so self-conscious saying they were from CIA that they just lied to their families, even though the paycheck that came in the mail was from CIA, right? And then you have seconded officers who will never admit it, or some seconded officers who were CIA for one mission, one tour, one time, and they tell the whole world that they're CIA officers. So you've got a mix of all of them. But as a rule of thumb, what I would say, if you suspect someone in your family is affiliated with intelligence, what you want to look for is they are, of course, secretive, intentionally secretive. It's not that you're too boring. It's not that you're not interested enough to ask good questions. It's that you ask good questions and they're cagey in their responses. That's one good sign that they're CIA. If they're cagey, it's not that you don't ask. It's that when you ask, they find a way to redirect the question. Another thing you want to look for is you almost always want to look for foreign travel or foreign capability, foreign language, foreign imagery, foreign backgrounds, something foreign, right? Because that's a good telltale sign of someone who's affiliated with intelligence. And I would say the third thing that you're looking for is whether or not they're in some way, shape, or form tied to government regulations. CIA is all about regulations. So even if you are a military operator or a covert CIA officer that's supposed to be a, tire salesman, real tire sales doesn't have a bunch of regulation. They don't have a lot of like really strict budgeting and really strict receipt keeping, and they don't have, strict timelines of how many days you can work and how many days off you're supposed to take. Nobody gets a 3-week vacation in the tire sales world, right? So if you start to see a lot of really strict kind of regulation and regulative activity, that's along with the other two, that's a really good indicator that you're dealing with somebody who's in intelligence.
Something I learned reading your book was that CIA officers often marry other members of the CIA. Is that like a more typical than it's not, you would say?
I would say it's common without being typical, because it's natural. If you think about it, when two CIA officers are at the agency together and they're single, the agency is very happy to facilitate their dating relationship, because these two people are going to be at the office more. They're going to be at work more often. They can actually connect because they can talk about details that they can't talk about with a non-agency officer. They may not be able to talk about, classified details, but they understand counterintelligence and surveillance, and they understand digital cleansing and communications hygiene. Like, they understand that stuff, even though one may work Iran targets and one may work Russia targets. So they get along really, really well. And then you also have two high-performing, high-drive, highly intelligent people who are attracted most likely to high drive, high ambition, high paced people. So it makes total sense for people to date, and CIA loves it when we have intramural dating. As long as we don't have big dramatic blow-ups. And generally speaking, when couples break up at CIA, when they're dating and they stop dating, it's not like high school and college where people get like pissy, right? It's usually something that's more professionally handled. Sometimes you get pissing matches, but usually people just move on, right? So you see it, and then when a couple is able to actually get married, that's usually also something that's relatively rare, not uncommon, but fairly, or not common, fairly rare, because once you get married, you're basically sacrificing. One of the two is sacrificing their own career because you can't climb together. It's the government. So if you climb together in the government, it's something called nepotism, which means that you can't give favorable treatment to somebody based off of a relationship. So now if you do get married, the organization itself is going to split you up to make sure that you can have independent careers that don't lend to nepotism. So many people will date and then just choose not to get married because once they do, then the agency will start to work against them. We have a joke at CIA that CIA will do everything it can to help you get a divorce, but it will do everything it can to stop you from getting married because it wants to have control. It wants to be like the jealous girlfriend. CIA wants all of your attention all the time. And it knows if you marry, whether it's an agency officer or someone else, your attention is going to get split.
Right. So the CIA wants you to date other officers, but not get married. So if you meet someone or hear of someone that's CIA, it's not necessarily a given that their partner is also CIA.
Correct. Most agency relationships are an agency officer with a non-agency partner. And if you think about it, it's because most agency officers are overt. Most of them are overt, which means they have normal lives and the agency is just where they work. So they can still go out to a bar and say, where do you work? And he might say, oh, I work at 7-Eleven. And she might say, oh, I work at CIA. And they can date and they can have a normal relationship because there's nothing secret about that person's work.
But for someone like you is it more common that they're married?
In a covert relationship, what you end up having is probably 30% of covert officers are in a serious relationship with another covert officer at some point in time. Sometimes we get married, sometimes we don't. If we get married, there's a massive amount of divorce. That's what people don't talk about ever. The average CIA marriage really only lasts about 7 years because at that point in time, between the professional challenges, the interpersonal challenges, marriage itself sucks at about 7 years. Anybody who's married will tell you it's like 7 to 12 years. It's really hard. So there's all these things that kind of compound. And then on top of that, you're geographically separated, running different missions, running different operations. And don't forget, if you want to get laid, like you're a master communicator. So it's not hard to find a date.
What's something you did as a spy that would be illegal for other people?
It's a very interesting question. Let me start by saying that CIA officers are given protection, legal protection, that allows us to carry out illicit activity. We can act like criminals without being held liable for criminal activity. Espionage, the actual act of clandestinely stealing secrets from anyone, is internationally illegal. You can't do it. You can't steal secrets from Google. You can't steal secrets from the Russian federal government. You can't do it. It's illegal in our country and in their country. So even if I as an American flew to Russia to steal, secrets from Russia, I could be held criminally liable in both courts. So that's one of those areas where we're protected, right? Another area that we're protected is illegally crossing borders because we're doing that all the time. Another way is we can assume false identities, false documentation in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. So we're protected there, right? Illicit money transfers, weapons, violence, intent to do harm. All of these are areas where you could be held criminally liable, that CIA officers are protected, assuming that we're working within the authorities of the operation that we were given. So it's not as sexy as the movies make it out to be, right? It's like, yes, a CIA officer might go somewhere to, jack somebody in the face, put a hood over their head and render them to Cuba, right? Or render them to Guantanamo Bay. Yes, that sounds really sexy, but there's like 15 illegal things that are happening there, not just punching the dude in the face and putting a black bag over their head, right? All the border crossing, all the identity stuff, the fact that you're carrying a gun in a foreign country where you're not allowed to carry guns, like all these things are illegal activity that's protected for us.
When you went to these other countries, did you rarely have a gun with you?
It's a great question. Most of the time when you are a clandestine CIA officer living and working undercover, you have to blend in. So if a country doesn't allow you to carry a gun, you don't carry a gun. Most civilized countries, most developed or developing countries of the world won't let you carry a weapon of any sort. Not a knife, not a baton, not mace, not a club, not a gun, not anything, right? So there's a great deal of time where you operate without any self-defense utility or tools on you at all. Again, very different than the movies. When you carry a gun, here's the really fucked up thing. When you carry a gun, you're almost always given a protective detail, because you as the core collector, you as the intelligence collector, your job is to collect the intelligence. Your job is not to shoot. So if somebody starts shooting, all the security personnel are supposed to return fire because their job is to shoot. They shoot better, they shoot faster, they can carry more ammunition, they can carry more diverse weapons. They have armor to stand in the way of the person who's shooting at you, and your job is to survive. So the reason that we carry weapons, when we carry weapons, is only for the rare instance where our 4 or 3 or 2-person security detail all get killed and we are literally left with no other option except to shoot our way out. It just doesn't happen because the people who protect us are so good at what they do.
On the topic of disguises, you've been asked about this a lot, but I don't think I've seen anyone ask you, what's the most extreme disguise you've worn as a CIA spy?
That's a good question. The most extreme, they're all really very similar. So I've had to wear very light prosthetics. Light prosthetics meaning like false mustaches, false sideburns, that sort of thing, right? An ear lift where you just make the top of your ear gets a little bit higher just to throw off like facial recognition. So small prosthetics is the most extreme that I've gone. Most of the time, your costumes, because we call disguises costumes, most of the time your costume is actually really hokey. It's really ugly and really basic because it's supposed to be convincing from a distance. It's not supposed to be convincing up close. When you wear something that's heavily prosthetic and designed for up close use, the risk goes up significantly because it's very technically difficult to make that prosthetic. It's very difficult to wear that prosthetic. It's very difficult to have that prosthetic last for a long period of time. And then if you're caught with a prosthetic, how do you justify that? How do you explain your way out of a fake face, right? So all the Mission Impossible stuff, it is quote unquote feasible, but the risk profile is massive. Because imagine when you start to sweat and your right cheek sags because the glue, the adhesive that keeps it to your actual skin just fell off. So now you've got this sagging prosthetic face and you're sitting this close to a Russian general. It's going to be ugly.
But you said you did prosthetics on your ears to throw off facial recognition.
Right. What
countries would utilize that theoretically?
I mean, even our country uses facial recognition. I'm sure you're pretty well traveled, it sounds like. I would imagine that when you've traveled, especially through Europe, or if you've been to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the border crossing you went through was facial recognition. It wasn't a conversation with a border patrol officer, right? And facial recognition was the first of all biometrics. So Heathrow Airport, I think, has the most passive biometric collection of any airport in the world. The United States is starting to introduce.
Where's Heathrow at?
In London.
London, okay.
The United States is starting to introduce it more and more in places like Texas and Miami. But most of all of like the first world European countries have been using facial recognition for a while.
So you would wear that so you'd be undetected like on a street scenario, or?
when your facial recognition is really not about your face. Facial recognition is about the geometric design of elements of your face. Cheekbones against nose, against eyes, against gaps between eyes and eyelids, and all the shit that when you look at yourself in the mirror, you're like, oh my God, I've got like my left eyebrow is bigger than my right eyebrow. Nobody notices except you and facial recognition software. So when you're trying to beat facial recognition, you're not trying to beat it in your true face. You're trying to register an alternate face so that when your true face goes through, it doesn't associate you. And you can do that with cheek lifts, and you can do that with prosthetic ears, and you can do that with changes to your hairline, right? You can do that with subcutaneous implants that make your, forehead look lumpy, or that pull your left eye further to the left, your eyelid further to the left. Things like that can be done to throw off. So, James Dean is registered as having a left ear that's high and a cheekbone that's high, but Jack Neel is not, even though the faces might look very similar in other ways.
Got it. I'd love to know how you go about registering that in, but I think that's a little too technical. Theoretically, what's the most unique gadget or weapon that may or may not be used by the CIA?
I'm telling you right now, the most sexy stuff is heavily classified, and what I know isn't nearly as sexy as I'm sure the stuff that they're using now, right? So just rest assured, CIA is always on the cutting edge of technology. It's not necessarily because they develop it themselves. A lot of times they are paying a contractor, Booz Allen Hamilton, Raytheon, Mantech, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. They're paying someone else to develop it. That's a commercial entity, but they're still on the cutting edge of it. I will say that most of the technology that CIA uses isn't what you would think from the movies. It's not weapons tech. It's not missiles and rockets and spy satellites, right? Most of the stuff is tools to improve the warfighter's capability or tools to improve the security of communication. So how do we scramble a signal or encrypt a signal a different way? Or how do we create like a closed loop system so that whatever transmission we're sending only exists in these two transmitter and receivers? It can't be picked up by any other radio transmitter, right? Think that way. Tools that we can use to piggyback off of digital signals that already exist in the World Wide Web, but we can piggyback on those signals without being detected, right? That's the kind of stuff that's really interesting, along with next-gen night vision, next-gen body armor, next-gen drone lenses. Like there's some really sexy stuff out there, even though it would put most people to sleep, like stuff that happens in the GPS world, in the drone world, in the avionics world, stuff that you wouldn't imagine is that interesting, but has massive implications in the world of combat or intelligence collection.
I don't want to get too conspiratorial with this question. I understand your perspective on conspiracies in general and mostly agree, but does the CIA have any influence on social media?
Yes, it does, but it's not quite as direct as people think it is. So social media is a commercial business. Your Twitters, X, your Facebooks, your YouTubes, all of those, they're not like, they fall under the First Amendment where you have the right to free speech, but the First Amendment only applies to your right to free speech against the government. It does not apply to your right to free speech within the platform itself. So the government does control whether or not YouTube is allowed to exist, or whether it needs to be dissected, or whether it needs to be split off, or whether it needs to be something, right? So in order for any company to operate, it must follow government code and regulation. Just like you have to register your business to have it be an LLC, or you have to register your business if you're going to get a bank account in the name of the business. Like there's rules about business. So you find that your social media companies, as they get really big, they don't want to break a regulation that's mandated by the federal government. One of the big regulations that's been created in the last 10 years is misinformation, disinformation, and and being a platform that's ripe for targeting and abuse by a foreign intelligence service, a misinformation campaign or a misinformation platform, right? So now YouTube and Twitter and Instagram have to worry about whether or not their platform is being manipulated by a foreign intelligence agency as a misinformation platform, because if it is, the government can shut it down. So how do they get around that? They get around that by basically hiring a bunch of former CIA officers to come be their threat detection and hostile, intervention team. Well, now you got a bunch of ex-government people who are sitting at Meta determining whether or not Meta is at risk of foreign intelligence and finding, of course, that it is. So then what does that group of people do? They take a hyper-conservative approach and they just throttle anything that looks suspicious on Meta. YouTube does the same thing, right? So it's not that CIA is shutting down your content. It's that CIA officers have left, been hired by Google. Google owns YouTube, and that team has decided, like, we're going to be super government about protecting content, so we're going to throttle everything that's even close to being something we, as CIA officers, would call misinformation.
Right.
So
and
then,
can you give an example of what that would look like?
What?
Like the examples of misinformation that they would be trying to censor from another country. So you're saying like the CIA equivalent in Russia could be trying to plant something on social media that we might get rid of.
Correct.
What would that look like?
So I think a great example is what we see right now with a lot of the pro-Palestinian movement stuff, right? You can be pro-Palestinian without being pro-Hamas. You can be pro-Palestinian without being sympathetic to terrorism, right? But if you put out a YouTube video that's too sympathetic towards the struggle that Hamas is having, if you use words like calling it Hamas instead of calling it Palestine, if you talk about terrorism as being something that could be justified, right? Now this team of people at YouTube are going to see that and say, hey, that could be construed as terrorist misinformation campaigns designed to make the West sympathetic towards the terrorist plight. So then rather than risk CIA tapping on YouTube's shoulder and saying, hey, you've got a misinformation platform, this team at YouTube of civilian people at YouTube who work for YouTube will just throttle the content, right? Or penalize the creator. I've had a number of my videos get slapped for copyright infractions or get flagged because some hyper-conservative team saw a picture, heard a word, and then they told me, your content is not appropriate for advertising, or your content does not meet our guidelines and requirements. They don't tell you what you violated. They just tell you that there was a violation. You can kind of appeal it, but kind of not. So they're trying to protect their business, right? Because at the end of the day, they don't need your content. They have 10 million other content creators. So are they going to risk the life of YouTube off of one YouTuber who makes pro-Palestinian content? No, they'll just shut that person down, kill their account, whatever else, and just move on. A fantastic example of this is what happened during COVID, right? Another very good example is there's a podcaster in London called London Real, a guy named Brian Rose. Brian Rose was one of the first podcasters to invite me to London to do an interview with him. Had a big YouTube following, but he was constantly kind of speaking out against conservative agendas, especially conservative agendas, or speaking out for conservative agendas against liberal agendas in the UK that broke policy for YouTube policy in London, in the UK. So they killed his channel. He rebuilt his channel. They killed his channel again. So now he's on like whatever it is.
Rumble, probably.
Yeah, Rumble.
Yeah. So you don't think it's always disinformation or misinformation? It's just not necessarily aligning with the agenda of the country?
I would say it usually is tied to some sort of foreign intelligence subterfuge, right? Whether it's misinformation, disinformation, or trying to impact or influence the culture in the United States. That's the stuff that they're looking for. That's the stuff that your Metas and your X's and your Googles are looking to reduce, because that's the stuff that can get them in trouble with the federal government, especially when FBI, NCTC, Homeland Security, Director of National Intelligence, they're all openly saying if you make your platform susceptible to foreign information, we will shut you down. So that's how you get more cat videos and less critical thinking about Palestine and Israel.
I guess the COVID one though, like when you weren't allowed to say COVID in videos, like how is that related to misinformation, disinformation, if like people were getting shut down for that? I mean, I guess technically it is, but that doesn't seem relevant to the benefit of intelligence agencies in other countries.
I think what it was, well, first of all, COVID wasn't the issue, right? Talking about COVID and whether or not it was real or whether the vaccine was real, that wasn't what the foreign intelligence services were interested in. What they were interested in was using the topic of COVID to radicalize political activity, right? Creating ads that used false statements about COVID specifically to aggravate the conservative base, and then simultaneously creating ads that made false statements about COVID to aggravate the liberal base, knowing that COVID was a determining factor in the 2020 elections, right, where Donald Trump got ousted by Joe Biden. Like that's what the governments in the United States and around the world were worried about. It wasn't about, is it a novel virus? Was it made in Wuhan or whatever else? Nobody cares geopolitically about that. What they care about is, how do I use this topic to motivate a political outcome that benefits our national interests more than their national interests? And that's the same thing with Palestine and Israel right now. How often do you hear news about Ukraine losing? You don't, but they are every day. Like if you read a foreign news source, if you read, anything other than mainstream American media, you'll even see Ukrainian officers saying the same thing, right? That they're losing ground, they're losing headway, they're losing opportunity. But what ends up happening is people don't want to touch it. They're so afraid to touch something that's counter to the predominant narrative of the United States. They don't make content about it. They don't talk about it. The few that do make a big splash, right? Like your Sean Ryans of the world. The majority of them just follow the mainstream narrative because they want to keep their business alive, right? Business Insider wants to stay on YouTube, and New York Times doesn't want to get kicked off of Facebook.
Andy, what's something you witnessed as a spy that you wish you hadn't seen?
A lot. The stuff that my mind always goes first to anything with children. I remember when I was in college, I asked my mom why she got into nursing. My mom was an emergency room nurse, and she oftentimes was an emergency room nurse who focused on like cardiovascular cases. And I asked her, like, why? Like, isn't that everybody you see is always on the brink of death, right? And she said that was much easier for her than the idea of ever being like a pediatric nurse or being a pediatric cancer nurse, where all you see day after day is children suffering. She didn't want to see that. She's like, sometimes you'll see a kid come into the ER with an injury, but it's not like they're going to die. So I remember her telling me that story when I was in the field watching horrendous things happen that included kids. Sometimes it was child soldiers in Africa. Sometimes it was children raising children. Sometimes it was overpopulated, undersupported orphanages in Southeast Asia. Like sometimes it was radicalized children terrorists, right? Carrying AK-47s that were only 3 inches shorter than they were, right? Like you see some crazy shit with kids around the world, and you start to realize how privileged we are in the West, where we get our childhood. There's not many countries in the world where you get your childhood, right? Best case scenario, in a peaceful, loving, developing third world country like Chile or Peru or Thailand or Cambodia, the children raise each other. So the 7-year-old drives a motorized scooter with a 5-year-old holding on to her and a 3-year-old holding on to her. And the 5-year-old's also got like a makeshift papoose holding the 6-month-old. And they're all on a scooter scooting down the road with a basket full of like onions. And that's fucking crazy to see on a Cambodian road, not an American road, right? Weaving in and out of potholes and other people driving and, wild pigs and dogs crossing the street. Like, it's crazy. And you see this everywhere, and it really makes you appreciate what children in America have and why it's so special and why we have to protect it. I always wanted to be a dad from the time that I was a little kid. I remember I had a stepdad. My stepdad wasn't a very nice dad. I lost my father in a violent crime when I was very young. So I was wired to always want to be a dad. So I remember all through college and all through high school, always just being so excited to be a dad one day. And that's really what primed me at CIA to be so sensitive to children's issues and what you see with children. You know, I saw fucked up adults often. I saw adults do horrible things to adults often, but we already talked about this. Human beings are flawed, fallen creatures. Like God said, we're all dumb shits. You all suck. So just accept it and try to suck less. So it was easy for me to see adults doing stupid shit to each other. It was much harder for me to see when adults abused children, when children had their worldview twisted so they would abuse each other, right? There's a pecking order, and there's a pecking order in these third world warlord territories where, you know, who gets raped and who gets slapped and who eats and who doesn't eat. And, you know, it's terrible to see what children do to each other and what adults do to children.
Yeah, having a crime channel, obviously nowhere near to the experiences that you've had observing it up close, but I always had to research these cases deeply. And a big reason I had to quit that channel was because I'd just done several cases about children in a row, and it was crazy how much more upsetting it was. It made it feel like less fictitious and more like real, like to hear like a Jeffrey Dahmer case versus like a little girl being kidnapped or something. But yeah, I definitely share your perspective on that.
There's something about it, man. It's sticky. It doesn't leave your head when you turn off the computer. It doesn't leave your head when you leave the country. It stays with you. And you spend the rest of your life sometimes trying to erase that stuff, right? Even as you talk right now, I can see you're recalling details in your mind, right? Your eye movements show that you're recalling details from the cases, and it's upsetting.
I don't want to press you on it too much out of respect, but just on the topic of children being forced to do evil, like what were the kind of, like, were they given large responsibilities? Like, or is it common in the world that children like actually like shoot each other in this kind of thing?
It's yes. I would say it's more common than we realize. Your fighting foundation for the future is your children of today. So strategically speaking, you can understand why Israel has no problem dropping bombs on populations that have children, because today's Palestinian children, through the eyes of Israel, become tomorrow's Hamas warfighters. So do you want to fight them tomorrow when they're Hamas warfighters and they're all carrying weapons? Or is it convenient to lose them today as collateral damage? That's part of the calculation that you make during wartime, right? We didn't only kill adults when we dropped nuclear weapons in Japan. We wiped out children, generations, right? And that was part of our calculation. Not the primary calculation, but a beneficial secondary outcome, right? The same thing is true for warlords in Africa, terrorist groups all across the Middle East, the developing foundation for militaries in Syria and Libya. It's how it works. So it's less about giving children large responsibility and more about getting them into an indoctrination cycle, or what we call a radicalization ladder, where you start to lay cognitive foundations, mindset principles that predispose them to making other conclusions later on in their childhood that reinforce previous conclusions, so that by the time they are 13 or 14, they're eager to fight for the cause, eager to learn how to shoot. Because it's not like they're getting paid very much. It's not like they have any other opportunity either. Are you gonna sell onions on the square on Sundays like your dad and make 11 cents a day? Or are you gonna carry a weapon and get 3 square meals a day and make 15 cents a day being an Al-Qaeda fighter? I'm Al-Qaeda all day long, right?
Are there children intelligence officers?
No. There are
Because it would
not,
be in the underdeveloped countries, theoretically.
and they wouldn't have the mental capacity to do what intelligence officers have to do. I don't mean they can't lie or steal, but managing lies, remembering details, writing documentation, communicating like stories, that kind of stuff. They are definitely used, especially in foreign countries, by foreign countries, because our American citizens are protected. American children are protected from labor. So you can't have a job under the age of 18, I think it is in the US. So CIA can't hire a 12-year-old and put him to work, right? Even in Hollywood, the only way that you make a child actor work is through all sorts of leaps and bounds, right? But, in Russia, you've got a begging child. You can totally turn them into a little pickpocket or an intel collector without making them an intel officer.
What's the oldest intelligence officer you've encountered?
Old. Really old. 80s, 89-ish, 88-ish. There's some very, very seasoned, we like to call them, intelligence officers. Oftentimes what happens is they retire from CIA after 20 to 30 years of experience, and then they come back in as a contractor for somebody else because that way they can actually earn real money. You might retire at $120,000, which sounds like a lot, except it's nothing inside Washington, D.C. But then retire on Friday, come back in on Monday working for a contractor, and now you're making $250,000 a year, right? You almost double your income. So that's what usually happens. And then once they're a contractor, they never want to leave. They're there until they fucking die on the job in the building because they're one-trick ponies. They've only ever done one thing, and now they're making a ton of money to do that one thing, but they're paying for 1 or 2 divorces, and they've got 2 or 3 kids in college, and they want to pay for their Jaguar. So very, very old. I will also say the youngest CIA officer I've ever met was 23. I'm pretty sure he was 23, and he was a super outlier, but had all the right accolades, right? Mom was a teacher. Dad was a teacher, like a high school teacher. He had always wanted to be in CIA. He had done all the readings. He had gotten all the right degrees from all the right schools. He got the right advanced degrees with the right grades and went to the right job fair in the right city and was picked for the one job that you can have as a 23-year-old kid. And then boom, he was in. We have interns at CIA. We have an actual high school internship program. So if you're a high school child of an active covered CIA officer or an active vetted CIA officer, you can come in and do like a summer internship. So that's always funny when you see the summer interns come through. And then we have college internships too, which is also hilarious because then you have, these 21, 22-year-old boys and girls walking through CIA and dressing like they think that they're CIA, where all the actual CIA officers are like grungy and kind of like crusty and angry because they're government employees.
Theoretically, if there was one thing on your mind that you didn't have clearance to speak on, would you ever drop subtle hints when you speak publicly so individuals could follow the white rabbit?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's because my personal mission since leaving CIA, that the mission for my company, the mission for my calling is to increase disclosure without decreasing American national security, right? And I'm very confident that I can walk that line, right? I've been walking that line since I first appeared with my own business in 2019. I've been walking that line as I developed my own book, my own memoir. And I've been walking that line, even though CIA is always just a parrot on my shoulder. Like I get emails from them 6 times a year. I've been up to Langley at least 4 times since I left, where they want to sit down and talk to me again. Like I get messages from CIA, pro and negative, right? Sometimes saying, good job, Andy. Other times saying, nobody asked you to be the CIA spokesman. We get this stuff. But the fact of the matter is the American people don't understand what CIA actually does. They don't. And they especially don't understand the hard work and true commitment that CIA officers have every fucking day for the American public that thinks that they're like broken, corrupt, and evil, right? Like there are thousands of CIA officers going to work today, working their ass off to keep us all safe, even though we sit here and we snipe them and we comment on them and we make accusations of what we don't know. And what CIA hasn't learned yet is that they can share more. They can disclose more, but they've been an agency that for so long has lived in secrecy because they're so afraid that if a secret is exposed to the American public, then our adversaries are going to know about it too. And they're not wrong. They're not wrong. But rather than try to find the right amount to share, they just play this very protective game of share as little as possible, which leaves all this room for distrust because it's human nature to distrust what you don't know.
Assuming that classified information, there's 90% that's irrelevant, could just be shared. Is there one thing that's on your mind that you just wish you could classify, but you can't?
One thing that I wish I could classify, but I can't?
Or declassify, sorry.
Oh, one thing I wish I could declassify. Yes, absolutely. Right? But I wish I could declassify where our book memoir takes place. That is one thing that, I mean, for 3 years, I've been fighting with CIA to try to let them just let us say the name of the country. And when we first started the process, they approved us to share the specific country name, right? And then geopolitics changed. And when geopolitics changed, CIA's risk tolerance changes. So then they classified the name of our country. And it's just very frustrating to me because what America could gain if they knew the location of our memoir and what our adversaries would gain if they knew the location of our memoir is not equal. Americans would gain so much more than what our adversaries would gain, right? Because our book is very much a book about how CIA adapted and changed its methods and protocols in a time of great hostility, in a time when strategic change was needed. And it's not what I want it to be. It's far better than what anybody's ever written before because more can be explained now than ever before. And because of my status with my own kind of leverage with the internet, CIA has never had someone like me they've had to deal with before. So it gave us leverage to get more disclosed than ever before, but it's still not enough for me.
It was killing me not knowing what the country was. I have it between two in my head, and is it fairly obvious, you think?
It's obvious to me because I lived it, but what ended up happening is part of that process of writing our memoir, we submitted the book to CIA. Well, then CIA gets to make edits to the story, right? And then they get to send those edits back to us. And we have to approve their edits because it's our First Amendment right to disclose any information that puts us in peril. So then we ended up going back and forth relatively collaboratively for about 4 months. Like, hey, we don't want you to use this word. And we were like, okay, we'll change it to this other word. And they were like, thank you. And then could you also change this word? And then, for a few months that was okay. And then it got to be a pain in the ass because they were changing, like I'm talking about, we wanted to say red apple and they were like, can you change it to Granny Smith? And like, that's not literal, but that's kind of the detailed example. We're like, why? Why are we doing that? Are you just wasting our time now? Are you just giving us the runaround? Like, it takes you 2 months to come back and tell us to change like apple varietals. Like that's stupid.
I could definitely tell you were trying to drop hints as much as possible.
So that was the workaround. They kept trying to change our shit. So then I would change my shit to try to get more disclosure and they would change it. And then it was this round and round game.
I was surprised some details made it in there, to be honest. I'm sure you were as well.
Well, and I was not about to flag it for them. I was not about to say, hey, are you guys sure you want us to say this? I was like, we're going to win where we're going to win. Because by the end of it took 3 years of fighting with CIA before the book got published. And by the time we were reaching that final crossing point, I wasn't happy with them at all. I wasn't cooperating. I was like, this is what we're going to say. And if you don't like it, we'll get attorneys involved. Because at the end of the day, we're American citizens. My wife and I are American citizens. American citizens have a First Amendment right to disclose facts about their true background, as long as those don't violate any classified information. But the burden of proof falls on CIA. So if I say something in a book that's classified, the only way I violate a crime is if CIA brings that classified document to court and shares it with the world. Which, are they going to do that or not? Right? That's the game we ended up having to play at the end.
So there's this whole headline you have. I'm sure you've seen people talk about it a lot. It's you want to leave the US by 2027. Is that still the case?
Absolutely. So what's funny is how that headline has been kind of misinterpreted. Even in your intro today, you said I was desperate to leave the US by 2027. I'm not desperate to leave the US by 2027. I just am planning for 2027 as my priority goal. Like if I can make that happen, then great. If I miss it by a year, so be it. Maybe I'm even a year ahead of schedule. We'll find out, right? But what it boils down to is that the United States is going through a transition right now, and it's an identity crisis. I've done my time. I've served my nation in uniform. I've served my nation out of uniform and undercover. I've served under presidents I agreed with. I've served under presidents I don't agree with, right? I've done my service to my nation. Now I have to do my service to my family. And the question I have to ask myself is it in the best interest of my family to keep them in the United States during this time of identity crisis in the United States, during this time when we have a convicted felon who's a president, but if we don't choose that guy, we're going to choose an octogenarian who pardons his entire family, right? We're stuck in a position where we've got lots and lots of bad options, not just when it comes to politics, but when it comes to economics, when it comes to military development, when it comes to international relations. Like we are in a very clear decline, not a spiral, just a decline. When I think about my responsibilities as a father of a 12-year-old boy and a 7-year-old daughter, when I think about my responsibilities as a husband to a wife who's my age and she has her own health and mental health challenges, when I think about my responsibilities for shaping their future and their future of opportunities, is that best served here inside the United States? And I would argue no. Because being an American in the United States is a very difficult thing to do right now. There's political debates, there's economic debates, there's religious and spiritual debates, there's ideological debates. Like it's fucking nuts inside the United States. If I take that same family and I put them in Europe, it doesn't mean they're European. It means they're Americans in Europe. And being an American in Europe has lots of opportunities that being an American in America doesn't have. Being an American in Australia has lots of opportunities that being an American in America does not.
What opportunities do we lack?
There's opportunities for reducing political extremism in your peer group, right? As an example, my daughter is 7. She doesn't follow politics. She doesn't know anything about politics, but everywhere she goes, she hears other people talking about politics. So she just starts to parrot them. When a child is parroting the, housekeeper of the neighbor's house, and that's where she's getting her political opinion from, right? Because her friends talk about it, because that's what they hear their housekeeper talking about, blah, blah, blah. Like that's a problem to me, because I can teach my daughter critical thinking when she's old enough to understand critical thinking. But if I try to just tell her not to parrot what she's hearing from the neighbors, it's going to be 4 years before I can teach her to think critically about politics. So what's going to happen in those 4 years? She's going to start to just have this opinion that's kind of ingrained in her. That's the problem with social media. That's the problem with what we see on our TVs, right? Our children are just absorbing whatever their parents are watching instead of learning critical thinking skills. And that's going to turn them into adults that don't have critical thinking skills. So I have to fix that. So one of the opportunities that exists is an area where let French people bitch about French politics. They're not bitching about American politics, right? And my American children aren't French citizens. They're just Americans living in France, as an example. Let that happen, right? And there's a whole different political climate outside of the United States. We're going through our adolescence. Europe is in a different stage, right? Southeast Asia is in a different stage. Oceania is in a different stage. So if you go to Australia, like they don't really, like they have politics, but they're not as divisive as our politics. If we were to go live in Cambodia or Thailand, there's still a kingdom. Like politics don't even really exist there. So it's a completely different world. Not to mention In the United States, you don't get international schools. You can in some cities, but not commonly. If we go anywhere else in the world, we can get into an international school. I can literally put my American children in a foreign country, enroll them in a private school at 50% of the cost of a private school in the United States. And that private school abroad can teach them a British, Australian, French, Swiss, Canadian curriculum, right? That's something that doesn't exist here at all. So that's the kind of opportunity I'm talking about. Not to mention the fact that outside of the United States, many countries offer free university education as long as you speak the language in that country. So now if my children spend a few years learning Poland or Polish, now all of a sudden they can go to school in Poland for free at a university in Poland. Maybe they don't want to, maybe I don't want them to, who knows? But the opportunity is there. We're here in the United States, we're a one language country, right? And the universities that pick where you go, it's more based on dollars and cents than capability.
So your key concern is the indoctrination of your children through the bifurcation of politics in the US. But you wouldn't fear that would just happen anyway with social media influence? Or do you restrict the use of your kids' social media heavily?
I heavily restrict what my children can engage with social media. And while social media is a big deal here in the United States, it's not the same everywhere else in the world, right? We are a uniquely consumerist culture. I mean, and I wouldn't say that my primary concern is the bifurcation of politics. I would say that my primary concern is that all of what we have is bifurcated right now. Everything is divisive. Like, even, dude, I was just having a conversation. I live in Colorado. I was just in South Georgia with a client, and at the same location was a gentleman who works for the client who's from Nashville. So he's in Tennessee and I'm in Colorado. We both have children about the same age. Our conversation in South Georgia was about how children in both Tennessee and Colorado can't even really just play sports anymore. Your kids in sports now have to it's much more intense than it ever was before. There's almost like an expectation, if not a stated requirement, that you will have like a commitment to practices. You will have a commitment to external coaching. You have to sign up for 3 different traveling leagues. That's not what it was like for us. That's not what it was like in the past. You could play soccer just for fun. You could play baseball just for fun. There was such a thing as love for the game. Now it's all about, well, what's your plan to get your kid to a college, scholarship with baseball? And if you're not thinking about a college scholarship with baseball, then the coaches don't want your kid on the team, right? So it's turned into this giant commercialization of even just recreational sports, which are supposed to be recreational. So this is, again, my kids can go overseas and they can play rugby and they can play football, which is soccer. They can play, cricket. They can play American baseball anywhere and actually have fun, instead of here where it's nothing but pressure and demand and commitment.
What countries are you looking at?
There's a handful. So we've got essentially the primary regions that we look at are Oceania, Europe, and Latin America. So in Latin America, we're looking at, Costa Rica has good options. Mexico has good options. Argentina has good options. The Caribbean has good options. In Europe, you've got good options in Romania, good options in Croatia, good options in Portugal, good options in Spain. In Oceania, you got great options in Australia and New Zealand, both, right? So those are kind of our regional focuses.
Would you do Puerto Rico?
Puerto Rico is the United States.
But technically removed from it, I guess. It's kind of like Hawaii in a way that it's just totally different culturally.
One of the big things that we're also looking for is a place where we could get second citizenship, because we want our children to have 2 passports. My wife was born in Venezuela. So growing up, she had 2 passports until the time came where she could no longer travel back to Venezuela to renew her passport because it got too dangerous there. So that gave her a great deal of flexibility. We want our children to have that kind of flexibility so that if they choose to travel on an American passport, they can. But there's lots of places you can't go with an American passport. Or if you do go with an American passport, you will be a target. So if they could don a Costa Rican passport or a Panamanian passport, they would be beyond initial scrutiny.
How many passports do you have?
In my house, I have 4. Active, I have 2. It's a little known fact. All Americans can actually have 2 active passports for the United States. So you could actually have 2 passports issued to you with different stamps in them. And it's because Americans need to travel to Israel. And sometimes if you have an Israel stamp in your passport, it prevents you from going to places that are hostile to Israel. So we actually always have the ability to have 2 passports in the United States that are just issued by the United States.
So you don't have passports or IDs of any other country?
I don't have valid passports or IDs of other countries. I have kept some of my previous passports that have been manually adjusted so that they're invalid, just because when you work for CIA, you got to keep some cool shit sometimes.
Oh, they let you keep the ones, like
They
the
don't
Alex
usually
Hernandez
let
ones?
you. We just don't always tell them when the turn-in time comes.
That would be a hard thing to not keep.
That's exactly. There's a lot of shit that we kept that we probably shouldn't have kept, but like they don't police it. And there's stuff you just don't want to let go of. You're like, this is too fucking cool. I'm not going to let go of this until they come take it from my house.
I want to ask more about the passports and stuff. Do you have like a driver's license of other countries?
So the short answer is no, because an American driver's license works in almost every country.
Yeah.
So I have had American driver's license that were not in my name that I used to drive in other countries, but I don't have any of those now.
Yeah, I've just heard people talk about like if you get pulled over and you have like a Thailand driver's license, they can't do anything with you if you're like have the driver's license there.
I don't know. In the United States, I don't know. I actually don't know much about how to operate inside the United States because all of our authorities were for outside of the United States.
Andy, who's the most impressive person you've ever met?
There are a few. There are a few really impressive people that I've met. So I will talk about a CIA officer that was very impressive because I think that that's probably the most relevant to when people probably don't care about who my favorite teacher was. But so there's one CIA officer that I met. Some of the people who know me really well will know exactly who I'm talking about. But when I was first recruited, I went to one of the rounds of recruitment interviews. We go through about 3 different rounds of interviews. I went to my first round of interview, and this person was sitting in the room with me. It was me, him, and like 11 other people who were all at the first stage of being recruited for CIA. And he was dressed in a white button-down shirt and a black suit with a black tie, like totally stereotypical. And there were like 9 other people all dressed the same way. And I was dressed like a dude who just got out of the military. So I'm like I'm like going to a nightclub. Like I was like, oh, I'm a dumbass. So I was just like, surely this is how CIA people dress. They dress like James Bond. They don't dress like Men in Black. So, I go in and I sit down and he sits down opposite me, and he makes this joke about my shirt, not like a teasing joke, but like a, you look way more comfortable than I feel kind of joke. And we just had a short exchange there in that interview room. And then I did my interview and left, and he did his interview and left. And we didn't see each other again until the day that we both entered on duty, EOD'd at CIA on the same day at the same time. And he was like, oh shit, I saw you in Reston. Reston's a city outside of DC. I was like, yeah, I saw you too. And he's like, I can't believe they hired you. And I looked at him, I was like, I can't believe they hired you. And like, it's just one of those funny things where he was like, yeah, you look like you were going to a nightclub. And I was like, you look like a fucking turd. So it was just this funny moment, and we became friends, and we were part of the same cohort. So when you go through training in cohorts, and he was part of my cohort. So, we were side by side, not literally, but through all of our training process. We were good friends, but not super close friends. And he just loved America and loved being a CIA officer for America and loved the work that he did. And like, he had come from the finance industry. He was in investment banking in New York before he joined CIA. And we go to the farm and we have our experiences at the farm, and he's, in a different training group than I am, but we're still there at the same time. And he just continues to thrive and continues to do well. And as we go through our careers, I was always very focused on trying to do something that was interesting to me. And he just focused on doing something that was high impact for America. Like mission after mission, he would just pick shit that was dangerous and terrifying and like cutting edge, but for policy reasons, not for like fun reasons. He could have gone and done crazy, fun, cool shit in Latin America, but instead, for policy reasons, the policy driver was whatever in the Middle East. So he went to the war zone, or he went to whatever else the target was in the Middle East. And like he suffered for it, man. Like he would get sick and he would get hurt and he would get, passed up for promotion. And he just never stopped putting America first. And it was fucking crazy because I got married, put my wife first. I had children, put my children first. And here he is today, almost certainly still unmarried, even though he is extremely lonely. Every time I visit him, he's always single. Every time I see him, we have a conversation about how lonely his existence is. And he's older than me, 3 years older than me. He's 48 years old. He's given everything, right? He's going to be too old to have kids, most likely. He's not going to have a bunch of money in the bank. He could have if he would have stayed in investment banking. And like, what an impressive guy. So
he just did the job.
He just, and he put us first every day. Us, like people who think that CIA is trying to kill people and listen to phone calls, like us who think CIA is some conspiratorial bad guy. He put us first every day. And that dude's going to fucking one day die in a coffin alone with no family, no spouse, no offspring, no progeny, potentially. But I'm sure as hell going to be there. And I'm going to be bawling my eyes out, dude, because he had the courage to do something I could never do.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I was in the military, and I'm a very principled person, but that doesn't always mean my principles are right. I'm a very principled person, and I had a colonel who was trying to mentor me because I was really trying to do what I thought was the right thing with regards to a project that I was working on with 3 or 4 other junior officers at the time. And I wasn't in a position of leadership, but I was opinionated. So I just kept like coming out and being like, this is how I think it should be done. I don't think this guy's doing it right. I think this should be done this way. I don't think she's doing it right. I don't think this is right. I think he's cutting corners. So I'm just, shooting straight up objective facts in a military environment, which is supposed to reward that, right? And this colonel looked at me and he was like, Andy, or, Lieutenant Greg. My name was Greg at the time. He's like, Lieutenant Greg, you need to understand that if you're going to succeed, not just in the military, but anywhere in life, you can't succeed with a trail of dead bodies behind you. And I had always been this way, and people have given me lectures about teamwork and given me lectures about cooperate to graduate, and they never sunk in. I heard them and I was like, you're wrong. But when he said that, when I got that visual of being at the head of the line, only because everybody behind you has been shot, 2 things jumped to mind. First, you're the one that shot them all. Like all those dead bodies are because of you. That's how you're at the front of the line. And second, who the fuck is going to fight with you if you've shot everybody on the way to the front? Now you're a one-man army. One-man army is sure to lose. So his advice, right? You can't succeed by leaving a trail of dead bodies behind you. Immediately clicked and it immediately resonated. And I changed my behavior in the military. I'm certain that it led to my success inside CIA. I still struggled with it. It's not like it was an overnight light switch, but by far the most useful piece of advice I had ever gotten is that you will not succeed if you leave a trail of dead bodies behind you.
That was beautiful. I just do want to clarify. So what behavior did you change and what view did it alter exactly? Like what were you doing before? Just so I can clarify.
Yeah. A big part of how I used to, when I was younger, when I was in college, when I was a junior officer, I would try to resolve conflict by taking it to the decision maker and stating my case, right? So if I disagreed with you, but somebody else was the decision maker, I would disagree with you and then take it to the decision maker and be like, this is what I think we should do. And I think he's wrong. I would take it to the decision maker and just state that I think you're wrong. And then I would state why I think you're wrong, and I would make my case, and I would let the decision maker decide. Well, all that does, whether the decision maker chooses me or chooses you, it's irrelevant, because what I've shown you is that you can't trust me. And I would do that all the time. I did that all through college athletics. I did that all through high school athletics. I did that all through academics. I did that all through the military. And I had plenty of success. There were plenty of times where I was objectively correct and the decision maker sided with me because I was objectively correct. But that didn't make him like me either, because as soon as we had a disagreement, I took it to the boss above him, right? And it was just this very destructive path to success. And it was always going to tap out. So what I learned, what I changed after that is now I leaned more into collaboration. Before CIA, I started experimenting more with collaboration. Like, okay, instead of just saying you're wrong based for these reasons, I was like, why do you want to do that? Why do you think that's the best plan? And what I discovered is that most people have what's known as noble intent. Most people are actually trying to do the right thing, like quote unquote, the right thing. They're trying to do the productive thing, or they're trying to do a productive thing that's parallel with the same productive outcome you're trying to achieve. So it's very rare that someone's just trying to throw the game. Everybody's trying to win. So you just have to give each other a little bit of space to figure out why and how. It wasn't until I got to CIA that they actually taught me how to properly collaborate with both peers and foes. And thank goodness I was kind of already experimenting with it, because if I would have been accepted to CIA with my previous approach to leadership, I would have not succeeded at all, because that organization is absolutely an organization where like dog eats dog, and you have to belong to a pack if you're going to survive.
Well, everyone, this has been your guest, Andrew Bustamante. Hopefully I can call you Andy now. This is the Jack Neel Podcast. Appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me, man.
For sure. Yeah.